from TIFR. He's a Professor Jim Thomas. He has the appointment as an assistant professor as ICTS and the Center for Applicable Mathematics, that is CAM, at TIFR Bangalore. And he has done the PhD in mathematics and atmospheric ocean science from Corrett Institute of Mathematical Science at New York University. His research investigates the geophysical fluid dynamics using theoretical, numerical, and data-driven methods. So today he's going to focus on the data-driven methods. Yes. Yeah. So I mean, this is the short introduction for him, and I will not take much time. He will give all his ideas of the data-driven model in the turbulent flow. Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you, Vivian, for putting up the seminar. So I'm going to present some work we've been doing looking at data-driven models and how to use neural nets and other methods for submesoscale ocean dynamics. So this is work being done with students, Mayank, Prison, Ustam, and Malcolm. So some of them are PhD students, some are year-long project students. And these are some of the papers we have written on this, and we have a couple more in the pipeline. So as you all know very well, the oceans form an integral part of the Earth systems. So the Earth, land, atmosphere, and the oceans, they're all coupled, and oceans are relatively the slow component. So the exchange of gases between the atmosphere and the ocean control global warming. And it's very important that we understand the ocean dynamics very well across a broad range of scales and resolve them correctly to understand long-term climatological predictions and impacts. So as we'll see, resolving a lot of the large-scale dynamics in the ocean has become possible over the past few years. This is a satellite image showing an eddy or a vortex in the ocean. At this point, we are close to resolving some of these scales, but as you'll see, smaller scales at the order of 10 kilometers and below, are still very hard to resolve in oceanic general circulation models. So let's a brief review of the equations we're dealing with. So these are the Business equations, and in the Business equations, this is a common number we'll encounter, Rossby number. So Rossby number is the ratio of the fluid vorticity to the rotation rate. So at the mesoscales in the ocean, which is ordered 100 kilometer or 50 kilometer, Rossby number is small. So these are scales in the ocean that are constrained by rotational planet. So rapid rotation is a feature of these scales. But as you go to smaller scales, what we call submesoscales, of the order of 10 kilometers or so, Rossby number approaches order 1 value. So there's a flow transition happening as you go from 100 kilometer scales in the ocean, which is rotation dominated, to 10 kilometer and below, which are submesoscales, where Rossby number approaches order 1 value. So this talk will focus on submesoscales, where we are at scales 10 kilometer or below. So here's a brief review of where we are with regards to numerical simulations. So in the Earth systems in general, the smallest scale we have to resolve is order centimeter. This is a Kolmogorov scale, and this is the scale at which viscous dissipation of the flow kinetic energy happens. And the large scales, the basin scale in the ocean is order 1,000 kilometers. So going from centimeter to 1,000 kilometers, there are about 8 decades of spatial scales that need to be resolved. So this is very hard to resolve, even in latest supercomputing facilities. When you look at the time scales, the buoyancy frequency in the ocean, the inverse of that will be of the order of minutes. So this is the order of the time scale of fastest wave in the system, order of minutes. Whereas when you look at weather changes, we're looking at it. I think there's an echo, right?
Is my turning?
Avoid the speaker.
Yeah. So the ocean time scale, the order of months. So that goes from minutes to months. That's about 6 decades of time scales. Whereas when you think of climate change, 100 years or so, we're looking at 9 decades in time. So resolving all these scales, going from the fast waves whose time scales are of minutes to climate change is next to impossible, because you have to resolve 9 decades in time and 8 decades in space. So this is the challenge in running Earth system models and resolving all the scales. So in India now we're talking about exascale machines. So petascale machines have been around. I think here you are using petascale machines.
Yeah, we have to our petascale.
You upgrade to exascale. The next NSM they're saying is exascale.
It is all future work. We will do it later.
Okay, so if you do exascale, you still have only 32,000 cube, right?
Yeah.
It's still far from resolving 8 decades. So even if you guys upgrade to exascale, you're still not going to resolve all these scales. And so IIT was a different story, but at university clusters, this is what is reasonably possible for models. 1000 by 1000 by 200. That's a reasonable resolution people run. But probably at IIT we have one more zero to all of this.
I am running 1024 cube. That is enough. We cannot.
So bottom line being that we're far from resolving all the scales we have to in the ocean scenario. And in the ocean modeling community, people talk about different resolutions. So there are, if you allow eddies in the simulation, that's called eddy permitting. You get to see that there is an eddy, but you don't resolve it. So that's eddy permitting. And then if you increase your resolution a little more and you resolve the eddy, that's called an eddy resolving simulation. And so this would be around, if you go up to 10 kilometers or so, then you're resolving eddies, sort of. And then if you go further below, you have submesoscale permitting. Remember, submesoscales are roughly below 10 kilometers. So you can permit submesoscales by going, having a grid scale below 10 kilometers. And then if you go close to a kilometer or below, you are resolving a significant fraction of submesoscale. So that's called submesoscale resolving. So this is a hierarchy of ocean model configuration people work with. And these are the scales that people talk about in the ocean. Basin scale is over 1,000 kilometers. Mesoscale is roughly 100 kilometers. Submesoscale is over 10 kilometers below. So if you resolve basin scale, if you have a model set at the basin scale, or if it's a global scale model, and if you're resolving the entire dynamics, then it's very hard to resolve dynamics below 10 kilometers. Submescales are not going to be easy. So that's the challenge, and that's where parameterizations come in. Can we parameterize features that we don't resolve? So here's a set of figures from Brannigan et al. This is around the 2010. After the 2010s, there was an explosion of work that showed the presence of submesoscales in ocean models. So this is a set of figures that shows us how ocean flow changes as you change the resolution. So this is a model that's at a 4 kilometer resolution. So you can see this is now eddy permitting. You can see that there are eddies, but they're not very clear. And if you go to 2 kilometer, start to see a clearer view. You see a lot more fine scale structures here. This is 1 kilometer. Now we're getting some of the submesoscale dynamics, and this is 0.5 kilometer. So we're getting smaller scales, a lot more structure. You can see the contrast between this flow and this flow. The only difference is the grid size decreased. So as you reduce the grid size, you start seeing a lot more new features. And so this is the problem, the numerical CFD people have with atmospheric models, because these simulations don't converge in the CFD sense. If you decrease your grid scale, you don't get to a point where the solution looks the same independent of the grid. That's very hard, right? So it doesn't converge in that sense. A lot of these atmospheric models are just run at the maximum resolution we can afford, and you call it a day. So this is from Brannigan et al. And what you see is, along with these small scale structure formation, you see the energy spectrum. So this is the energy spectrum. So the blue one corresponds to the lowest coarse resolution, 4 kilometers. And as we increase the resolution, you can see this is the inertial range. It's getting longer and longer. So dissipation starts here at the highest resolution, whereas with the blue one, the coarse resolution, you don't even get an inertial range, a clean inertial range. So with increasing resolution, the solution changes a lot, and you start resolving a lot more small scale structures. So the question is, these submesoscale dynamics, they're known to be important. They affect, they drain energy from these large scale eddies. They can also feed these large scale eddies in some conditions. And depending on winter or summer cycle, they carry a lot of the energy and exchange energy with the large scale eddies. So it is important to resolve these.
So here, what is the exact smallest scale where the distribution of the eddy happens here? Because you have done the different resolution. But what is the theoretically or exact distribution scale? The resolution at what kilometer or centimeters?
Yeah, dissipation is at centimeter scale.
1 centimeter.
Yes, that's the Kolmogorov scale.
That's the Kolmogorov. Okay, fine.
So up to there, that's the reality. And then in these models, so for example, in this particular model, dissipation is starting here. 10 kilometer scales. Whereas if we increase the resolution, so the highest resolution dissipation is happening around a kilometer in this model. So in these models, we go back and look at equations. Right? Dissipation term explicitly not, but if you write down dissipation term, so you have a Laplacian of velocity here, right? So that viscosity is dissipating energy at the grid scale. So now, for mesoscales, where Rossby number is small, so in the small Rossby limit, you can do some asymptotic. So this is something you learned in the GFT class, and you can apply asymptotic analysis, and you can show that the eddies, the balance dynamics alone, evolves according to the Cauchy-Hughes property. So this is the QG equation, and this captures quite well the dynamics of geostrophic balanced eddies. So this equation was derived in 1948, and this was used for the first successful weather forecast. So von Neumann and team used the first computer ENIAC to capture an evolution of this QG model, and that made the first weather forecast. So QG equation is very popular in this community and conservation community because it's a model that bypasses all the fast waves. It is only mesoscale or balance dynamics, and it's a single equation model. So compared to the Boussinesq equations we saw earlier, this model is a single model, single PDE that can capture balanced flow dynamics. So the thing so far I've been trying to point out that as Rossby number approaches 1 at submesoscales, there's a lot of departure from balance dynamics. So models like QG dynamics, so QG model doesn't work at submesoscale. So we can address 3 kinds of problems in this talk using data-driven methods. One is predicting parabolic modes. We'll try to predict high parabolic modes in the ocean from low modes. And then the second problem we'll be looking at QG-like model. Can we develop quasi-geostrophic-like models for submesoscale flows? So that'll be the second problem we'll look at. And the third problem will be, can we use these neural nets to predict submesoscale tracer dispersion? So these are the 3 kinds of problems we looked in this talk. So the first one, so in the atmosphere and the ocean, people know this very well that if you project the dynamics on vertical modes, and there are different ways to do this. What you do is you're projecting it on parabolic modes. So in the special case where buoyancy frequency is assumed to be constant, vertical modes will be cosine. But if you have like a stratification that's different, you have eigenfunctions corresponding to that particular stratification. So this is the vertical projection of velocity. So when you project velocity and other variables on vertical modes, parabolic modes, what you see is that a lot of the energy in the ocean lies in the first few vertical modes. So the paratropic and the first parabolic mode, second parabolic mode, they contain a lot of energy. And the high parabolic modes contain relatively less energy. So now a model that can capture the dynamics of these models is what we call the true vertical model. So this is a simplified model. It's like shallow water. It's like shallow water, except that you're projecting all variables on just 2 modes, paratropic and 1 high parabolic. So if you take the Boussinesq equation and project it using this is a model that can capture some of the interesting features where parabolic winds excited inertial waves in the upper ocean. These waves can interact with eddies in the ocean. So this model is kind of used for these kind of studies. So it's a simple shallow water lake model that can capture the dynamics of eddy wave interaction. So this is how the model looks. We have one equation for the barotropic flow. This is an equation for baroclinic velocity. And this is the baroclinic pressure, which is also the same proportional to the buoyancy. So this is the true vertical mode model. And this is used a lot in the atmospheric community also. These are people who use this for convection problems, where you want to focus on 2 vertical modes, barotropic and 1 high baroclinic mode. And a lot of the times, the situation is that this particular mode, barotropic flow, contains a lot of the flow kinetic energy. And this mode contains very little energy. So it's an idealization for the situation you see in the upper ocean dynamics. So this is how the flow looks as you increase Rossby number. So I'm showing you a set of experiments where we are varying Rossby number. So Rossby number is increasing from left to right. And the red markers are showing us the barotropic energy, and the blue markers are showing us the baroclinic energy. The baroclinic energy is much lower than the barotropic energy, and this is how the flow looks. So the left column is showing us the barotropic vorticity. This is the baroclinic speed. So you see, this is that low Rossby number. So low Rossby number, we have a lot of these large scale dynamics, 3D dynamics. But as increased Rossby number, the flow generates a lot more small scale structures. And so this is more like mesoscale turbulence, and this is more like submesoscale turbulence. So this is a simple model like shallow water that captures this transition from mesoscale turbulence to submesoscale turbulence. And this is showing us a histogram of the vorticity field. So you'll notice that red is at the lowest Rossby number. So the vorticity histogram is more or less symmetric, but as it goes a higher Rossby number, the black one or blue one, you'll see the asymmetry. So this is something that's known in the ocean community. The vortices, they become skew symmetric, asymmetric with fatter tails towards the positive vorticity. So cyclones are more dominant in submesoscale flows, whereas anticyclones are relatively weak. So this has to do with instabilities of anticyclonic vortices at submesoscales. But this is a feature that's seen in more complex models and observations that's being captured by this model. And so the question we're asking is, so this is the question. We have, let's say we have data from a barotropic flow. Can we predict the dynamics of the baroclinic flow? So we're asking, if you know low mode dynamics, can you predict the physical structure, energy spectrum, PDFs, etc. of the high mode baroclinic flow? So and the challenge here is that in observations, the low modes are better obtained. Low modes are high energy, so they're easily obtained. These high mode components, they are low energy, and therefore it's not easy to characterize and quantify them. So if you can get this small disturbance from this order 1 data, it's an achievement. So that's the plan. So we work with a different set of neural networks. So I'm assuming people have seen very basic neural net or talks where this is essentially what a neural net does, right? So you're giving it an input, this neural net multiplies it with the weight, adds a bias, and then it's doing this over and over again. So once you give an input, it concatenates this with different kinds of functions, and you get to choose these weights, etc., to minimize a certain loss function. So in the loss function, you get to write down what you want. So you have true. This is what you know is true, and then the neural net gives an output, and you can minimize the loss function so that they come close. The neural net output matches the truth. And so you train this neural net with some of the data, some truth, and then you are trying to get the neural net output to be close to the truth for cases that it hasn't been trained, or it hasn't seen. And so we work with a few different models. So there are models called unit, where you have input coming in, and after a lot of convolutions, so there are these upscale and downscale processes, and you get an output. So this architecture is called a unit because if you flip it around, it looks like U. And then, so this is one architecture we use, and then we use an architecture called GANs, or generative neural nets, where you have a second component called a discriminator. So these are details you learn in neural net models and neural net architectures. You can combine these two, unit and a discriminator, and you get what is called a GAN. And so we use variants of this, a conditional GAN, as we'll see in the next slide. So this is very briefly how our architecture looks. We have a unit, and then this is our discriminator. If we combine these two, we get a GAN. And these are just numbers showing what we use for a particular problem. So you get to choose and set different layers to optimize your output. So let's look at. So these are some predictions. So this is the baroclinic velocity. This is a truth. And this is a prediction from unit. So unit is not doing very well because it gets some of the large scale dynamic correct, but it's not getting the small scale dynamics right. This is the conditional GAN. So that matches reasonably well. And this is what we call an RC GAN. RC GAN does a very good job at matching the structures. And this is the X component velocity, and this is the Y component velocity. This is the truth. This is the unit prediction. This is GAN. These are the two GANs. So when we look at one more slide and then come back to the comparisons. So these are the PDFs. This is the velocity PDF. So truth is the black one, and the RC GAN is the best model. So it captures the PDFs very well. This is the energy spectrum. So again, black is the truth. Unit is the green one. That's the one that's most off, but the GANs do a good job. And so this is for people who have looked into neural nets a little bit. If you work with a GAN, what you see is that at the highest weight number, there's a noise that can fluctuate a little. So these GANs are known to produce some of these spurious oscillations. So this RC GAN is a modification of GAN where we put an extra regularizer to remove this part. So while it trains, you can add extra layers in the architecture that I showed earlier. This is what a regularizer does. So in the regularizer, you can let it learn parameters so that the energy spectrum in the dissipation range decays smoothly. So that's what the regularizer does. So once you incorporate the regularizer in the GAN, these spurious oscillations will be. So that's the RC GAN, the red one. And the RC GAN is the model that does the best. When you compare the PDFs and the cycling. And when you look at the comparisons, so these are, so we have about 40 different flows, and we trained up them on some of them and tested them on remaining. So these are the average numbers, kinetic energy ratio. This is a unit, it's only 39%, but RC GAN gets it really close. Kinetic energy dissipation. So these ratios are ratio of the prediction to truth. So the kinetic energy dissipation is again close to 1. Kinetic energy flux and flux ratio, they're all very close with the RC GAN, which is again this neural net model that has this unit component, discriminator, and this extra regularizer. So that's the summary of the GAN prediction. So the specialized GAN can do very well in capturing the high barotropic modes directly from barotropic mode. So this is useful because, like I said, in the ocean observations, you can relatively easily get low mode data, but high mode data is often corrupted because it is low energy. But the dynamics of these low modes are low energy, high modes are very important. So by training this neural net, you can get very good predictions between the truth and neural net output by using a suitable loss function and a specialized GAN model. conserves energy, kinetic. And inverse energy cascade, energy goes from small scales to large scales. And similarly in QG, you get these vortices grow and get bigger with time. So this is a simulation of the QG model where you get vortices merge and get bigger with time. In 2D turbulence, you get the same thing. So now the QG model, what is QG model missing? So if you have QG dynamics with eddies are very energetic, you get flows like this. But if you have flows that have waves, eternal gravity waves, eternal gravity wave dominant flows look like this. You have a lot of small scale structures, they're very dissipating and so on. And we saw some of these frames earlier. In the low Rossby limit, you get flows like this. This is more like mesoscale flow. But as you approach Rossby order 1 regime, you get a lot of these small scale structures. Positive vortices remain, a lot of the negative vortices are destroyed. You get highly skewed flows with histograms or PDFs of vorticity skewed. You have shallowed energy spectrum that's increased Rossby number and so on. So the question is, can we go beyond QG? Can we modify QG to capture flows like these extreme cases? So the approach here is you go back to asymptotics. So in a GFT class or atmospheric science class, you will learn how to derive QG. And typically in a class, you will stop at the QG equation. You don't go beyond, but you can go beyond the QG equation. So this is first done by Allen in 1993, and a lot of these papers talk about different ways to get beyond Cauchy geostrophy. So if you do an asymptotic analysis in this small Rossby regime, the Rossby number is a small diameter, what you find is that this is a modified equation where the potential vorticity has the QG part, and then there's a Rossby number multiplying geostrophic corrections, and then there's a Rossby multiplying wave correction. So this is a potential vorticity, and similarly the stream function can be written as a geostrophic stream function plus geostrophic component plus wave corrections. So this is an equation that's more valid for longer times asymptotically in the small Rossby. So this is in the small Rossby. And now what we're doing is we're taking inspiration from this kind of model. This is known for a while. We're taking this inspiration. We are saying, let's take the QG equation and we're adding this extra term. So here's an extra term that is being added. It's a stochastic term. So QS is a stochastic variable, which is related to a stochastic stream function. And this is something we specify. So we get to specify the stochastic term as an amplitude multiplying k bar minus k. So this is a field that has a certain spectrum that we put into the QG equation. So when you do that, this is what happens. The way we put in this term, we still have energy conservation. So if you multiply this equation with stream function psi and integrate on the domain, you can show that this model still conserves energy, but this model does not conserve entropy.
So, Jim, can you go back to the previous?
Yes.
Can you tell us something about that QGG and QWW? What actually that manifest?
Yeah. So this, for example, this has like a lot of terms that, for example, you can have terms like psi times Laplacian psi. That's one term, and then you can have terms like gradient q squared. So asymptotically, you get higher order terms. As we'll see, these are terms that cause asymmetry, the vortex asymmetry.
So that is the largest departure from the geostrophy. It is a higher order departure from geostrophy, or what?
So it's asymptotically small. Right? These are higher order corrections. So, and some of these papers, I think Muraki is a paper that shows these terms. So if this equation is also called QG plus. So if you numerically integrate QG plus, you get asymmetric vortex structures. So those are the terms that cause them. QG, if you drop all these terms, you get QG, which is insensitive to cyclone, anticyclone, asymmetric.
Yeah.
So these higher order terms are important to get those. So yeah, so we put in this extra term. So because of that, we conserve energy. Energy is still conserved because of the way we put this, but we lose entropy conservation. So entropy, which is obtained by multiplying this whole equation with Q, that's not conserved anymore. And so because of this now, we don't have an inverse cascade. The dual cascade is being broken. In 2D turbulence and QG turbulence, you have inverse cascade of energy and a forward cascade of entropy. That appears because you have two conserved quantities, energy and entropy. So once you break entropy conservation by putting in this term, you can stop the upscale cascade or inverse cascade of energy. And this extra term, this term that we put in, we can control the strength of that term. So we're defining this parameter R. So big R is the ratio of the stochastic term divided by this original size. So the stochastic term stream function gives us a certain energy, and this is the energy of the remaining or the deterministic part. That ratio is R. We can control that. So that controls the strength of the term. So now this is how the flow looks. As we increase the strength of that term, you can see how the flow transition. This is when the stochastic term, this term is very weak. And as we increase the strength, it transitions from 2D to 3D like turbulence. So this is the energy spectrum of the flow. For these flows, we have something like k to the minus 3 or steeper than minus 3. But for this kind of flow, we go towards the k to the minus 2. So this is the energy spectrum. This is the energy flux. So this is the inertial range. At low strengths of the stochastic term, you get it's almost an inverse cascade, but with increasing strength, you get a forward cascade. So by putting in this term, we can get a forward cascade of the flow. And this is a very minute detail in the turbulence community. In 2D turbulence and QG turbulence and all, there's no intermittency. So intermittency is this is one way to quantify intermittency in turbulence. You can write what is called velocity structure. So structure functions are computed as the difference in velocity between 2 points. So you take velocity at a particular point and add R to it, and then you average it over all the R, all the excess. So you do an ensemble average, and that gives you velocity difference between all the points separated by a distance R. So this is structure function. Now, a feature that's known in 2D turbulence is that this structure function is independent of R. So here I'm showing you a PDF of this structure function for a small value of R and a large value of R, and they overlap. Whereas, so this is known for 2D turbulence and 2D like turbulence. Whereas in 3D turbulence, there is intermittency, and the structure function deviates a lot. So red is the structure function PDF at small scales, whereas blue is the structure function large scales. So there is a transition in this structure function depending on the scale, and this is showing that this flow has intermittency. So we have taken a 2D flow that has no intermittency, and by putting in this term, we are getting 3D like flows, turbulent flows that resemble 3D like flows. So with that, we are getting features like this. So we could use this model to go from flows like this to flows like this, which is geostrophic turbulence or submesoscale turbulence. But we'd like to get features like this, where we have low Rossby, we have big coherent structures, whereas at high Rossby, we have positive vortices as coherent, negative vortices destroyed. So to get that, now we go back to this term. So this term has been asked. This particular term has a series of quadratic nonlinear terms involving geostrophic terms. So there are many such terms here, and I didn't write them down explicitly, but they look like this. So stream function times potential vorticity square, PV times Laplacian P. So there's a lot of terms. So this we decided to modify this term to bring in this asymmetry. So what we're doing now, we're going back to the QG equation. We are saying, let's add this extra term here. We call it F. Okay, so this F is a term that is going to be discovered from a series of terms. So we are providing a family of terms, and this F is going to be selected so that we get most asymmetric PDF for vorticity. So we want PDFs like the one I showed you here. We want these kind of PDFs with fatter tails on the positive side. So this procedure is called equation discovery, where you take a series of terms, you feed it in, and you evolve the dynamics of this model with different terms, and you pick the term that gives maximum asymmetric vorticity PDF. And with this procedure, this equation discovery, this was the optimal term. If you put Q square here, you get asymmetric vorticity structures. So this is an illustration of all these terms now. So this is a flow with no stochastic term or no residual term, no asymmetric term. Now, if you turn off the stochastic term, and if you put this asymmetric term, so epsilon is 0.25, you can see the flow looks like this. You can generate positive vortices, cyclones dominate, very few anticyclones. So you can get these skewed flows by putting in this term with appropriate strength. And this is a flow that has both the stochastic term and the asymmetric term, and you get a lot of these broken small scale structures with this big vortex. So, and these are the vorticity PDFs. So black is for this flow, it's symmetric, whereas blue and red are these guys with fatter tails on the positive side. So you can generate, by tuning these parameters, the strength of this term and the asymmetric strength, we can generate a lot of realistic looking flows with submesoscale features. So these are now some comparisons where we're looking at different complex model flows. And so we call this model S2DV. I didn't tell you the name. So S is for submesoscale. Okay? Submesoscale 2D vorticity equation. That's this model. So these are comparisons of S2DV with different complex models. So this is from the simulation, and this is S2DV generating similar flow. And this is from Dedizio et al. I think this was an MIT GCM simulation, and this is S2DV generating similar flow. This is Siegelman 2020. It's again MIT GCM producing a submesoscale like flow, and this is S2DV, and this
S2DV is a data driven, or this is also dynamical?
S2DV is a data driven model where we have found this term was found with equation discovery, and this stochastic curve is something we prescribe.
You found this equation from the data driven model, and then you're solving the equation numerically.
Correct. Yes, this model is integrated numerically, and so what we're doing here is to get those realistic flows. So we're looking at a particular flow, we're looking at one of these flows, and we're tuning the parameters, the strength of the stochastic term and the strength of the asymmetric term to generate qualitatively similar flows. So this is Solodok, it's a Crocker model, Crocker ocean model in the East Mediterranean Sea, and this is S2DV. And these are from that two-mode model that I showed earlier. This is S2DV producing flows. So S2DV is a model that can generate submesoscale flows, and some of those flows I'm showing the PDF here, vorticity PDF. This is Pussinesque. Pussinesque is red, S2DV is blue. This is Solodok, S2DV, and Solodok's. This is the two-mode model, vorticity PDF. So by tuning these two parameters, we can get some flows from S2DV that mimics realistic flows. Now this is another application of S2DV. So in the ocean community, it's not just the fluid dynamics. There's also a lot of tracers. So for example, planktons, right? There are a lot of planktons in the ocean, and these planktons. The problem with plankton is you don't just put in one plankton. So if you want plankton, you need nutrients coming in. You have a chain of planktons, a plankton feeding on a plankton, and those phytoplankton, zooplanktons. And so there's an entire ecosystem that comes in. So there's a lot of ecosystem tracers that you have to integrate along with the flow to get realistic oceanographic situations. And this becomes challenging because they're integrating a lot of PDs, and the computation becomes very expensive. So when you have flows like S2D, which can generate subscale flow, this can be helpful for generating appropriate plankton models. This is an illustration. This is one illustration where we're saying So there's something called paradox of plankton. The paradox of plankton is, so in the ocean and in general, the nutrients available for a community is very limited. You have only so much nutrients available. But when you look at the plankton ecosystem in the ocean, there are a lot of plankton. So there are so many planktons existing with limited nutrients. So the big question in the community is, how does so many organisms exist with limited nutrients? Because there's always competition. And when you have a competition, one or two species will dominate. But how do you have so many species coexisting? That's called the paradox of plankton. And one of the explanations that's offered often is that these planktons, they're not always existing at the same scale. Some are at larger scale, some are at smaller scale. So there's a cascade of plankton, what is called patchiness. So this plankton species distributed across scales. These kind of hypotheses come by advecting plankton equations, such as this. So this is the plankton equation. This is a phytoplankton equation. This is the advection of the phytoplankton by the flow. This is the nutrient consumption, and this is the zooplankton eating the phytoplankton. So this is the zooplankton equation. Zooplankton being affected by the flow, zooplankton flipping on phytoplankton, and the zooplankton dying. That's simply the. So this is a simple model, and showing you flows generated by S2dV, which are used to advect these planktons. So this is in a flow which is more like something which is more like mesoscale. You have eddies. So when you have eddies, the planktons are stirred in a certain way, and this is a flow that's more like submesoscale rich. So the planktons are advected very differently. So S2dV is a model that you can use to generate flows that can advect these plankton. So instead of running a realistic ocean model with a lot of computing involved, you can use this model to perfect your plankton equations and so on. So these are this is showing the plankton variance spectrum for the two flows. So blue is that mesoscale-like flow, and red is the submesoscale-like flow. And these are the distributions. So the point being that by tuning the S2dV flow, you can generate different flows, and they can generate different patchiness of the plankton community. So it's useful for ecosystem modeling. That's one application of S2dV. So you can find more details of that S2dV in this page, published last year in James. And then last problem we'll look at is using neural nets for tracer dispersion. So this is a passive tracer equation. And passive tracers in the atmosphere and the ocean, the tracer dispersion is again highly sensitive scale. So stirring of the tracer at 100 kilometer, 10 kilometer, and 1 kilometer are very different. And when you look at the ocean community and the research that has gone to this field, what you find is that stirring of the tracer field and setting the diffusivity of the tracer plays a big role in ocean circulation strength, ocean uptake of carbon, sea surface temperature distribution. They're all sensitive to the diffusivity you put it. So and a challenge in the modeling community is how do you specify this alpha? Alpha, if you model results up to 100 kilometer, 10 kilometer, you need a certain alpha. But if you resolve up to 1 kilometer, the alpha is going to be very different. So parameterizing alpha, getting alpha as a function of mesoscale strength, the subscale strength, and so on, is a very challenging problem. And so with all the data-driven stuff, we are asking, can we replace the tracer dispersion equation so that many studies that show that the diffusivity that we saw here, diffusivity in the ocean is changing a lot. At mesoscales, you get a certain diffusivity, but as you go to submesoscales, there are symbol theories based on which you can construct diffusivity values, but observations often deviate a lot from what is predicted by symbol theory. So for a very long time, people have been trying to parameterize this. What is alpha? Can be estimated? Can we put it in? But with all those data-driven methods coming up, we are asking, can we replace the tracer equation completely? And can we predict the tracer field directly from the flow? So if you know the flow, can you predict the tracer directly without integrating the tracer equation? So this again is a problem in neural net dynamics. You worked with a few different neural nets. So autoencoder, autoencoder is one of the simplest neural nets, relatively fewer parameters. And then we saw this earlier, this is a unit. And if you add a discriminator to the unit, you get a GAN. So it's a GAN. And then we came up with a new model called LOCON, which is an abbreviation for local convolution. So here the idea is that you learn in neural net community or machine learning basic classes, a convolution layer works this way. So you have a window that is scanning through your matrix of data, and this window, as it scans, the weight associated with those equation that I showed you for the neural net, that's fixed. The weights are fixed as this window moves. So in this LOCON or local convolution, the idea is that these weights are variable. So as the convolution goes on, the weights are allowed to vary. So by doing this, we allow this model to capture local inhomogeneities. So this turned out to be very useful for the submesoscale tracer prediction.
Can you explain again this local convolution?
Yeah, so this is like a cartoon. For more details, we should talk with the code. The idea is that this weight, when you put in a convolution layer, a 2D convolution layer, for example, you're trying to find a set of weights.
Yeah.
Right? And the weights are fixed by scanning through the entire window. Yes. But instead of doing that, you can say, I want for a particular region, I want a certain weight. And in a different region, I want a different weight. So you can choose how the weight should vary across the domain. You can specify that. And by doing that, you're allowing more inhomogeneous dynamics in the system. So that's the principle. So that's what you do is these are called LOCON layers. They're inserted in the unit. So these are the separate layers that come in. And so what have we achieved by this? So here is an illustration. We have 40 different dynamic regimes, 14 total, and we're using 14 of them for training, and 26 are used for predictions. So this is the loss function. The loss function that we use for this particular problem is the difference in the tracer field between prediction and truth. So this is the loss, the L1 loss. And then we add this extra part. This will become clear in the next slide. We call this the spectral loss. The spectral loss is really we'll see the tracer spectrum. I'll get to this in the next slide. Let's come back and look at this. Now, what are we achieving by this? You can see to generate. So here, 14 regimes are used for training, and 26 are these white cells. The white cells are the prediction cells. So if you have to predict, let's say, if you have to generate 20 frames, 20 snapshots of the tracer field for these 26 regimes, it will take you about 81.3 hours by direct numerical integration of the tracer equation. But instead, this, including the training time, the total time taken by the neural net models are these written here. Autoencoder takes 1.64 hours. LOCON, this is the best performing model as we'll see. This takes 1.8 hours. So you can see, you're going from 81.33 to close to 2 hours. So you get a speed up of close to 45%. So you're getting data 45 times faster by training neural nets to do the same job. And this paper describes a lot of the dynamics. So we'll look at some results. So this is the tracer field. So this is a true tracer structure, the passive tracer structure. I'm highlighting a small box so that you can see that these fine scale features, how well they're captured in different models. So this is a LOCON. LOCON does a relatively good job. UNet captures large scale dynamics, CAN also captures large scale dynamics, but the fine scale features are missed by these models. And autoencoder, this is the smallest model, so it doesn't get much dynamics here. This is the tracer spectrum. So now when you look at the tracer spectrum, black is the truth, and you'll see that all the models, they fall below the truth in the inertial range. Beyond wave number 30 or something, all of them are going low. So this is why we introduced that spectral loss. So in the spectral loss, we are saying in that inertial range window, we want the tracer spectrum, the prediction and the truth to match very well. So that's the spectral loss. So by combining the L1 loss and the spectral loss, we get the tracer predictions to be better. So here, all of this is without spectral loss. This is with spectral loss. The spectrum we can see, especially the LOCON, the yellow one, it matches better in the inertial range. So that's the idea of using that spectral loss. So this is for a particular Rossby number, and then we increase Rossby number. This is now more sturdy. This is again without and with spectral loss. Low cone again does the best, but the yellow curve is falling off after the initial so before the dissipation rate. But when you put in the spectral loss, you can get the spectrum to match very well, along with the physical factors matching very well.
Any specific reason why in the dissipation range it doesn't work below the subinertial scales? The truth is falling sharply, but the simulations continues. Specific reason to that?
Oh, you're saying that
Yeah, right.
Truth.
At that range, this neural network seems not.
Yeah, so what we did is, see, if we just have this loss, if you just have this loss, then this is what you get. This is actually a feature of neural nets. Neural nets are good at getting large scale dynamics very well. It gets up to here. You don't get this part. So for the spectral loss, what we did is we said we want this part of the spectrum to match. So we didn't do anything for the dissipation rate. There's a separate model we added to lock on where we said we wanted dissipation range also to match. Then it captures the drop. The reason we didn't include that is because, see, in these numerical simulations, we're using hyper dissipation for the steep fall off. That's because our resolution is only up to here. So we're using hyper dissipation to remove tracer variance reaching viscous scales. If your neural net output is decaying slower, that's actually a good thing because it's capturing an extended range of implicit scales. So that's why we left it without tweaking it here. But by adding an extra layer and training it, we can bring it down. So that's this is again showing how the spectral loss works by. So the spectral loss, if you remember, the loss function has a relevant part, and there's a factor here lambda, which we can tune to decide the optimal value of the spectral part. So by tuning this is how you get the spectral loss part to be optimal, so that the truth and the prediction matches. So, and this is about the tracer flux. So now, so what I showed earlier was a tracer field alone, but sometimes we need to compute the tracer flux, and tracer flux is a derived quantity. So if you take the tracer field and if you apply coarse graining, so coarse graining means you're saying I want from the tracer field small scale dynamics. So I'm taking the tracer field, I'm allowing only Fourier modes greater than a particular value, and then I'm doing an inverse Fourier transform, bringing it back to the that gives me a tracer field that has always small scale structures. Now going to the tracer equation and manipulating, we can derive an equation for the tracer variance for the small scale tracer variance, and that will look like this. So this phi is the flux term. So this is a tracer flux, and that will look like this, for example. So this tells us where the tracer is getting cascaded to small scales. That's tracer flux. So this phi involves gradients of tracer, velocity dotted with gradients of tracer, and so on. So this is a derived quantity. So getting this correct is a bigger challenge for the predictions. So this is how the tracer flux predictions look with and without spectral loss. So again, let's look here. For example, the truth is this: low cone model is doing this. It's doing a very good job. So tracer flux is being very well captured, and these are distributions of the true and predicted tracer flux distribution. So black is the truth, and low cone, the yellow one, is doing a very good job. The other ones overshoot. And then there are features like these unit and GAN. They develop extra features, artificial features in the flux. So this is showing us that these models are not getting these derived quantities like flux correctly. But low cone, this particular model does a good job in getting the tracer flux also very well. So and then, this is maybe the last couple of slides. So once you have the flux, you can ask what physical space regions contain most of the flux. So this is something that's done in 2D turbulence and tracer dispersion community. So you can take the flux and you can add the flux over say vorticity, for example, and you can ask which vorticity regions contain most of your tracer flux. So this helps us map physical space regions where most of the flux. So here is an example. this is a flow, and this is the red and blue regions are regions that contain 90% of the flux. Okay, so what you notice is that these vortex cores are gone. So the core of the vortices, they contain very little flux. And this is so this is low low speed, this is high low speed. Again, you'll see that this is the full flow. This is the region that contains 90% of the tracer flux. So the green are regions which have disappeared. These are vortex cores. So vortex cores contain very little tracer flux. So now we are using the neural nets to predict physical space regions that contain 90% of the flux. So this is the low low speed case. This is the flow. This is true prediction of the 90% flux. This is a neural net prediction. So this is higher Rossby number increasing. This column is the truth, and this is the neural net prediction for physical space regions that contain 90% of flux. So this is again very useful because we're doing all of this just by having the flow. So if you know the flow very well, once you train these neural nets, you can get the tracer field, the tracer flux, tracer spectrum, and all of that directly from the neural net. So okay, so I think with that I'll stop. So we looked at 3 different problems at submesoscale, oceanic submesoscales, as well as we approach our own values where traditional reduced models, traditional models can be replaced by data-driven models. So first we looked at the scan model. We can use a GAN model to replace to predict high modes. So in the ocean, low barophilic modes are easily obtained. High barophilic modes have very little energy, but these modes are important because near inertial waves, for example, are high modes. They have less energy but high shear. So it's important to capture their dynamics correctly. So we're using a GAN model. A tuned GAN model can do a good job in predicting the high barophilic mode dynamics. And then we use this technique of equation discovery to come up with a model S2DV, which can generate realistic looking submesoscale light flows, which are much cheaper than running ocean models. So S2DV flows that I showed you, they can be run on a laptop, whereas a lot of the ocean circulation models, you have to run them on big clusters. And then the tracer problem, a lot of the tracer community is trying to construct the diffusivity. What should be the diffusivity of the tracer in the model? Whereas, if you have enough tracer data, you can train some of them, and you can throw away the tracer PD. You can predict the tracer field directly by knowing the flow. So this is very, very useful because if you have satellite data, for example, and if you train the model, if you train the flow and tracer with some data set, you can predict some of the tracer snapshots from the neural nets. And as we saw, it's about 50 to 100 times faster when you predict it from the neural nets. So yeah, that will be that. I'll stop there.
Okay, thank you, Jay. I think we can already. So we can take a few questions either on the both the side, ocean dynamic side, and also he introduced some conditional gain and 2DB method if you want some detail something, because she gave not big detail of the neural network model, but you can ask some question now or during the tea time. So we have a tea after the your talk. So please.
Start from Jim. I have the one question from your last part of presentation.
Yes, you proven that the PD of tracers can be removed by using lock-on method.
Yes.
Will this conserve the mass also, because most of the BGC problems are driven by limiting nutrients. So the pattern looks similar, but it doesn't conserve mass because PD kind of guarantees the conservation. But what about this?
So these models. So say one thing before that. This is one of the reviewer comments when we submitted this paper. This domain is periodic. So one of the review question was, are you enforcing periodicity in predictions? And we were not enforcing that. So we went back and looked at it, and we found that the models have learned that periodicity is conserved up to about 95% or something. So the same way, mass conservation, we are not enforcing that,
but it will learn.
It is learning. But if you want such extreme conditions, we want this for sure, it can be enforced. So just like that spectral loss function that I showed you, this was enforced because we wanted the inertial range to match well. So same way you can add extra condition. So this idea is what they call PINs, physics informed neural net idea, where you put in conditions to match
whatever requirement you have. So that those and other conditions can be enforced. We are not putting them right now.
One question about your first part of the presentation, that you proven that using barotropic, you want to predict baroclinic using the machine learning.
Yes.
But in most of the realistic flows, when baroclinic take more strength than the barotropic, say monsoon, for example, southwest and tropical easterlies will have a higher baroclinic structure than barotropic. I wonder, why did you think the other way around than barotropic, then predicting baroclinic?
Yeah. So this is an example where in the ocean upper layer, this is, for example, it goes back to papers of Wunsch. The first few vertical modes contain most of the energy. And in some regions, it's the first baroclinic mode that contains most of the energy.
The baroclinic domain.
It's first baroclinic. So you could also replace this with the first baroclinic mode. We can write down an equation. So the equation will change a little bit. You will have equation. You'll have couple equation for one baroclinic mode and a high baroclinic. That can also be done. We just did it for this model just because we had a lot of data for this model. But the idea can be extended, and the essential idea is that we want one mode with a lot of energy and another mode with very little energy.
Very good example of PIN and how we can derive the loss function. The way we derive the loss function, we will get the output accordingly. That's what I think he has tried one or two, but there are more scope here. It's very good. I'm first time seeing the use of PIN and in the turbulent flow. That's more ocean people. No other question? Okay, so we don't have more question, or if you want to ask later on in the during tea time, you can take. Okay, so once again, we thanks Professor Jim Thomas for coming here and now. And, we have become a friend very recently in this year, in the July only, in the ITDM itself. And he has very, very quickly he has visited IITM within 6 months. Friends. Okay, thank you. So we have the tea